This is Charles. Charles is going to be giving the talk on freshwater and marine aquaria. And do you want to take it up from there?
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I think.
Yeah.
Plenty of power. Well, first I'd like to thank you all for having me. A little bit about myself. I work in the aquarium service industry. So we take care of fish tanks. We build, design, install, mainly for public and private clients. I do the aquariums of the G and the Blackrock Clinic, so those are two examples. This is the backstage of the G, actually. So I'm just going to talk to you tonight a lot about aquariums. I'm not going to get too technical, but a little bit. So it gives you a bit of a background of what to watch out through college, where to pay attention, what will be relevant in the future. I'm also going to talk about how aquaculture and aquariums are related, because really, they're very close together. So anyway, I'm just going to start. This is my first lecture, so I'm a little bit nervous, but we'll see how this goes. Give me 10 minutes, I'll be all right. So why are aquariums important for aquaculture? Well, the aquarium is really just a glass box. So if we take and we do a closed system salmon farm, we do any other type of farm where we're using a closed system, really we're just taking a glass box and instead using a fiberglass tank or a pond or another vessel, really. So it's not so far away. Now, closed system aquaculture also uses exactly the same principles. So you're still dealing with the nitrate cycle, you're still dealing with the different chemical compositions, dealing with biomass. It's all the same as we do in our aquariums. So they're very, very closely related. Also, because an aquarium is a small, you can do quite small aquariums. It allows for close examination and monitoring of aquaculture subjects. So, for example, another usage is doing pelagic fish larvae. A good example is they're breeding bluefin tuna now in Japan, working very, very hard to try and close the cycle because, as you know, the bluefins are in trouble. So they're using tanks for this. I mean, this isn't too far from our fish tanks. We're just taking filtration outside of the fish tank, putting it in another design, and adapting it to our use, So the preservation and propagation of threatened and endangered species. Now, this is an important one, because there's a lot of small fish species that only inhabit small areas of the planet. Now, you see this fish here, the Bengal cardinal fish. Now, this is one I'm going to talk a little bit about later. This is an example of where conservation and aquaria are very closely related. Now, they're actually a little bit in trouble because of aquaria, but that's another story. It's a cycle, really. So, close observation of fish and invertebrate behavior. Now, a good example of this, if you see this little animal here, this is the pygmy seahorse. Now, the pygmy seahorse was identified in 1969 in an aquarium. No one knew these existed. They're very, very small. I mean, think about the size of your thumbnail. A 2-centimeter little seahorse. So the first species was discovered in 1969 in an aquarium on this Gorgonian coral that you see it on. And because it's so closely matches the Gorgonian, I mean, it even resembles the polyps, everything. So no one knew these were around until someone actually went and looked at one in the aquarium. Now we've discovered almost 50 species of tiny pygmy seahorses, and some of them are, mature size 11 millimeters. You're talking from the tip of the nose to the tail. So you're really, really tiny animals, and we just wouldn't know that these were there if it wasn't for aquaria in the first place. So kind of an interesting little fact, and that again ties into the micro-identification and study. A good example of that as well is zooplankton. A good way to look at zooplankton is take a small aquarium, because you can study these and you can basically put them into a small bank. Think of it as a small system, where you've got a collection of different zooplankton that you can look at, you can propagate, you can examine the different aspects of these species, Anyway, if we're going too fast, just let me know. I'm still getting over the first few minutes here. So, aquarium-related careers. How does this tie into you guys in college, and how is there money for it in the future? This is the big concern with everybody these days, right? Well, there's aquatics retail centers. This is kind of obvious. Pet shops, aquatic centers, this type of thing. There's the aquarium service industry then, which is basically what I'm involved with most of the time. You have the likes of live wholesale facilities. Now, this would be both fish for aquariums and also the live food industry, which is very, very big in Asia. They like their fish very fresh, so often you go to restaurants and, you pay top dollar, but you have live fish to choose from. So this is how they tie in. And then a cherry picker would be someone who works for a wholesale business, like either a coral purchaser or even a live food industry. And these are people that would go out to the collectors' stations and basically pick out the really, really top quality animals. Now with something like coral, you can get crazy, and people are paying €1,000 for something, you know. So it really depends on what you're after, you know. And then of course, public aquariums is an obvious one. You know, we're just talking about giant aquariums, you know. There's aquaculture research, and I believe you were asking me something there a little while ago. You're doing research in fish tanks. That's a prime example. A fish tank, like I said, is just a smaller box. So it allows us to take any animal and more closely observe it, and more deeply in detail, and, you know, work on the reproduction, work on the nutrition, and you can see the animal there every day, you see. So it's very important for that. Now, closed system aquaculture farms. This is something we haven't really touched on too much in Ireland. There's one or two around. There's the abalone out in Carr, I'm sure a few of you have heard of. I'm sure there's some other examples. I know there's a turbot farm up in Apple that uses closed system. And again, a closed system is really just a big fish tank. You're addressing the same waste, the same principles are there. We're still worried about oxygen, pH, all these elements. But we're going to get more detail into all this later on, so don't be too scared at the moment. If anybody has any questions as we're going along or wants me to repeat anything, just let me know as well. So anyway, we'll go to the next one. And of interest, this is the whale shark. This is the newest thing they're trying to keep in Japan. So unfortunately, they haven't been successful. These are a very, very big planktonic feeding fish. So trying to solve the nutritional aspects is a big challenge. Okay, so the aquarium service industry. So this is what I work in. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what we do. These are two of my aquariums. Now the top one is the one out in the Black Rock Clinic under Moonlight, and the other one is the standard freshwater tank. Now this tank is using plants, as you can see. So I usually rely on the natural cycles. You know, you can, for example, you can remove waste by chemical means. You can remove it by mechanical means. But if you can remove it by biological means, you're helping to close the system of nature. So an aquarium like this actually utilizes a lot of the plant growth for part of filtration, you know. But in my business, basically, you know, it's pretty straightforward. You go there, you find out what's going on, you know, scout the site, you identify what the client is looking for, what they're after. Do they want a large fish tank? Do they want seahorses? You know, do they want to go crazy in 10,000 liters with sharks in it? You know, this is what you have to figure out. So then you basically have to, what the client is telling you, figure it out and demonstrate what can be done then. Can you do sharks? Is it possible? You know, can you do seahorses? Is it feasible in the location? You know, then you have to go back to the client with the design. Now, have you noticed we haven't talked about the design yet? That's on the next page, and you'll see this all ties back into each other. And of course, then you must quote the clients and give them an idea of how much price it's going to be. But again, you have to go through the other steps before we get there. So the system design is an important aspect. This is pretty much the make or the break for the business. You know, you have to think about the aquarium. You know, what size box you're going to do, what type of glass are you going to use. You know, at the same time, you want to be thinking of the livestock to intend to keep. If it's, you know, for example, a seahorse, you don't want to put it in a long, skinny tank with a massive water flow. It's not going to suit the conditions. So really, you want to be thinking about the aquarium with view to the livestock you intend to keep. And again, the cabinetry and support then is really just building it. How does it look into the home? Does it integrate into the business? And of course, is it well supported? You know, a kilo of water is roughly 1 liter. So if you have a 100-liter tank, it's like you or me standing on a table. So if you go up to some of the big sizes, like 1,000 liters, it's equivalent to a small car there. So you really have to make sure they're well supported. And the same, the access. You have to think about how you're going to clean the tank. You know, if you're doing a tank that's 1.5 meters deep, how are you going to touch the bottom? How are you going to deal with a little piece of algae that's way over there that your arm doesn't reach? So you have to address this in the design. And you see, this all goes back to when you're meeting the clients as well. So then we have the electrical system. I mean, obviously this is straightforward. You just need to compensate for the fact you're going to have 50 odd plugs or however many different circuits you have to run, and how to do it safely and to make sure no water gets onto the electrics. You're not going to get a shock or any of this nature. Then the filtration for the system. Very, very important. The filtration is how you support the system. So then we address the heating, cooling. You know, does the aquarium need to be heated? Does it need to be cooled? What type of species are we keeping? Are they trout, for example, will it need 15 degrees? Or are we keeping something from the Amazon that's got to be 30? All this needs to be considered. But really, it's more about the system design, you see. So when you decide you want to keep a certain animal, you have to think the whole system through and how you can best address conditions for this animal. But we'll get into more detail, of course, with this. And then lighting. Now, lighting is crazy these days. You have so many different options. I'm sure you guys have all heard about LED lighting. This is the new craze, and you know, obviously the energy efficiency and these kind of aspects make it hugely attractive. But there's new things coming out all the time, like plasma lighting is a really crazy one. It actually uses a small bulb of gases and it shines a magnetron at this. The magnetron is what you have in your microwave, and it vibrates the gases, and then these gases give off light. It's very similar to our sun. So I mean, you can really get high into the technology because, I mean, for example, if you're keeping a coral reef tank, the thing you need to think about is, think about the tropical sun. If you're near the equator, just how much intensity is hitting these corals. And but now I mean, talking about shallow water species here, we're not getting into the 50 meter or so depth, but that's a lot of light to try and reproduce in captivity. So if you haven't addressed this in the right manner, it makes the energy usage of the aquarium very high, so it's important. And then the plumbing system, again, not all aquariums have plumbing, but this is very similar. Now, back to what I was saying about aquaculture, if I were to take all these things and just change aquarium and cabinetry and support, it's exactly the same as if you're designing a closed system aquaculture project. The only difference you see with an aquarium is we're using a glass box. So it's quite interesting. And also it depends on, for example, in an aquarium you're really looking at keeping display for a long time, how to keep the animals healthy for, the whole lifespan, some of them 10, 20 years. Where if you're doing a fish farm, you're looking at how much biomass you can hold, how quickly you can farm your fish, and you're addressing many of the same problems as, for example, the hormones, and fish build up hormones in the system, by the way, and feeding and biomass. So it's really, you're just leaning towards different purposes of the aquarium. Okay, so then internal circulation, this is just how the water flows inside the tank. The aquascape is basically how we lay out the tank inside. So are you going to do the plankton tank like I showed you earlier, rock work, coral tank, this type of thing. Nutrition is very, very important. This is one of the biggest problems with keeping captive animals. If you cannot feed it, you cannot keep it alive. It's that simple. If you cannot feed it properly, it will not last very long. They won't have a long lifespan. Many animals can survive 1 or 2 years of captivity with an adequate diet. And then one thinks, okay, they're doing well. And then in the long term, you start to see different diseases pop up that are caused from the nutritional inadequacies. So it's very, very important to get the diet right. And then, for example, something like the deep sea slugs is a good example. I've assumed some of you have seen what's called a nudibranch, the sea slugs, very, very colorful animals. Well, some of these feed only on one specific type of coral, or for example, there's one that lives in the open ocean that only feeds on man-of-war jellyfish. So obviously something like this, cannot be kept in your average fish tank, and it's important to know that. If you can't farm man-of-war jellyfish, you're not going to feed the nudibranch. So it's that simple, The other important thing is definitely the maintenance schedule. You have to think about how you're going to, how much time do you want to put into the system. Is it suitable to be done once a month, or every 2 weeks, or once a week? It really depends on the different aspects of the system. As a general rule of thumb, the more equipment we put, the less maintenance we have to do. And I mean, we're living in a very modern age now. You can go crazy with fish tanks. I mean, you can have your phone, you can be halfway around the world, you can turn off pumps, you can feed your fish, you can look at the webcam, oh, my fish are okay. It's nuts what's available these days. So, it's what you want to make of it. So installation then, and again, we're just addressing the similar things. Really the main point of installation is addressing how you're going to solve the technical aspects, and of course, expect the unexpected. Bring your extra tools. Think of the things that could go wrong, And then this just takes us to the different steps. First thing, you set up the aquarium. Get the cabinetry done. Get your electrical system put in. Your filtration system. This is the lighting comes next. And just go down the whole way down the list until you've got this all done. Now you see, I've got system maturation there, right? Now this is interesting. Many people, if you go to a good pet shop, for example, they'll often say to take the tank home, wait 2 weeks before you put a fish in. This is simply to allow bacteria, because bacteria are our main source of filtration, and really should be relied on as such. Because if while we can use chemical or mechanical means, if you're trying to, you're going to have to pay for that. It's an expense. So if you can use a bacteria to do the same thing for free, by all means, always go down that route. It just makes the most sense, really. Okay, maintenance. Okay, so then this is important aspects one has to look at. Now this goes the same if if you're keeping your small little 60 centimeter fish tank with a few guppies and mollies, the same thing has come into it. And then exactly if you've got a 20,000 liter abalone farm, you've got the same aspects. So this is how they're really tied together, So, usual, get there, watch the fish. observation, straightforward. Nutrition, see if everybody's well fed. Do you see any signs of wasting? Do you see any skinniness at the back of the head? Are the fats right? At the same time, are the fish not obese? We often see obesity, especially if you go to public aquariums that have nurse sharks. It's very, very common to see obese nurse sharks in captivity. Just they don't get enough exercise and they get well fed, and often they feed them well because they don't want them eating the other animals on display, you see. So it's, you're mixing sharks and jacks, they're kind of prey and predators. So chemical correction. Now this is a little bit of a complex subject, so I'm going to skirt over it more in the second half. But basically, as animals grow, they take certain nutrients out of the water. I suppose the most straightforward example of that would be corals. As a coral grows, we all know it makes a calcium skeleton. Well, that calcium has to come out of the water. So as the coral is growing, it's removing this calcium. It also takes magnesium and a few other elements, but this all has to be corrected for. If your calcium is coming out and it's dropping too low, you can't grow corals. And the same thing can happen for many, many different aspects. For example, if you're growing a system that's fish and plants, you really have to worry about stuff like iodine, iron, to make sure the plants are healthy. So there's many, many different chemicals we have to address. And so really you have to research each animal you're looking into. And once you know what the animal needs, and you do your water analysis properly, you know what needs to be addressed, and then it's an easy matter of correcting. So I really suggest, if you're interested in this, pay attention during chemistry, because you'll find out you need it later on, And it's really a lot of the basics are the important stuff, your balancing equations, understanding what magnesium and sulfide and calcium carbonate are going to do to each other. So, I know it's a little scary, but we'll get to more of that stuff later. Pay attention to chemistry, that's all I can say. Okay, waste management. That's simple. We have to deal with food. Everything produces waste. We have to deal with it in some way or another. So that's just, a general thing. Are you going to clean a filter, for example, or are you going to do a water change? This all comes into it. So evaporation replacement. Now you notice I put salt does not evaporate there. This is a very common thing that people do, especially with marine aquariums. They come in and they go, my fish are doing really bad, I don't know why. And you start to ask them a few questions and you find out they're topping up the evaporation with salt water. Well, salt doesn't evaporate. So you're left with saltier water until finally things can't take it anymore. So evaporation is important anyway. Water testing, just knowing what's in your water, very important. The debris removal, again, that comes under waste management. Clean your filter, you maintain your equipment, the pumps need servicing. This is kind of a little bit of the boring stuff. Glass surface cleaning, clean glass. Straightforward, And of course, most important thing is keep your client happy. Because at the end of the day, if the client isn't happy, it doesn't matter how good the fish tank is. Okay, so this is an interesting, now we're going to start getting into the pretty pictures here. Now, a lot of people have seen coral reef aquariums and photographs and such like this, but they don't really know about how this all happens. So this progression is a great example of a tank done this way. If you look at the top photo, you see it's just barren rock. Okay, now this will be living rock taken from the ocean. So in this rock there'll be lots and lots of different microorganisms. I mean, we could be up to 250, 300 species found in this rock. Different types of copepods, various zooplanktons, some of the phytoplanktons, worms of a numerous species, crustaceans. I mean, you name it, it comes in on the rock. Seaweeds, everything. So basically, at the top picture, you're seeing, the ocean there. Okay, so the next picture, you'll start to notice there's a small bits of color. See these little guys? These are all little corals. So these are corals that have been aquacultured in captivity. And now what this person has done is glued them to the rock, you see. Use certain types of glues and epoxies allow you to stick the corals to the rock. And now you're going to see how these are going to grow over the next 2 years with proper maintenance, So here we are 4 months later. And you can see it's starting to change already, And, yeah, we see it gets better. So, I mean, again, what I was saying about the calcium, you see, these corals are depleting the calcium. They're producing waste. So all this has to be addressed in the system. Okay, so the next one. It's getting a little denser. It's starting to look more like a real reef, isn't it? So, I mean, it's just a matter of proper maintenance. I mean, this is not so hard to do. Now, I mean, it can be done very, very simply. But I advise for anyone interested in setting something like this up, is to talk. The only place marine aquarium gets a bit confusing, really, is the chemistry aspects are a bit heavy. But we're going to talk a bit more about that after the pictures, the more boring half. So, here we are 2 years later. And when you look back to that original 2-month photo of where the corals were, it's pretty incredible. You know, just to think that we can do that in a box in our living room. You know, it's you know, like many of these corals, I'll show you some examples here. These are acropores, these skinny ones. You know, you see the tabletop reef pictures? Those are the acropora corals. They live up in the very top of the reef where the most waves, most turbulence is. And they're amazing. I mean, it's just amazing, the colors. But these are a good example of corals that, you know, are in trouble in the wild. And I mean, only, I think it was about 1970 odd we started to be able to keep the first successful corals in captivity of this type. So it's pretty new science as well, you know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the G, because the G is another tank that's done similar. We have corals, we have seahorses, we have a few different aspects here. Just a little bit about the aquarium. It's 3 meters by 60 by 60. It's roughly 900 liters. The whole system would be roughly 1200 because there's a second tank below. I'll show you that more in detail in a while. We're talking 23 to 28 degrees Celsius, so we're tropical conditions. It's a little bit seasonal, which is good actually. It's not good to keep your fish at the same high temperature all year. They don't experience this in nature. Almost no fish would, except for the deep ocean. So it's important to look at the seasonality as well. So the salinity is around ocean salinity, normal strength, 35 ppm. It's all based on seahorses and their cousins. And this is one of the really challenges of this aquarium because it's a big, big aquarium. And to try and figure out how we can take small little seahorses, make a really nice display, not have it look empty, because I mean, 20 seahorses can camouflage themselves very, very well in 1 square meter, and you'd be half an hour trying to find the first one. So, you know, this had to be addressed to keep the client happy. And then nutrition, of course, of seahorses. The biggest problem with seahorses is feeding them. These guys only really like live zooplankton. Now with training, especially the captive bred varieties, you can get them to eat frozen plankton, which is this frozen mysis shrimp. And then the chemical additions in a tank like this are calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, which is basically baking soda, and trace elements. So I mean, this will help keep balance. Other than that, I'm really just doing water changes. You know. So this is how the tank was. And this is about 2 years ago. It was designed. How many of you guys have seen Fish Tank Kings and Tanked and these kind of shows that are coming on National Geographic? I see one person in the back. Anybody else? Well, you see these beautiful coral sculptures they put into the tanks. Well, unfortunately, 3-4 years down the line, they start to look like this. They lose the color. They get algae that gets into the pores of the coral inserts. Can't be cleaned. The other aspect is these are actually hollows, so they create areas of stagnant water within the aquarium. So the decision was made, we had to change it. We needed to do something a bit more modern, a bit more tasteful. And to be honest, the seahorses weren't thriving in these conditions. We were having a few problems we just couldn't figure out. So we decided to make the change. So a basic design plan was made. I mean, we're talking basic. Draw up and paint. You know, come up with an idea of how you want to do it. Try and visualize it long before you ever go to build it. So I mean, you can see here, this is the original design plan, by the way, that I sent to the other member of the company before we did it. So, I mean, see, I planted the live rock here, you know. We were playing where the rock piles were. These are the pumps. There's the return system. And you know, see, sand area, we were just talking about different corals we wanted to put there. Just coming up with something to give us the next step, you know. So this is how we started. Now remember from the last series, you start with bare rock. There's not much going on really. Now over the coming weeks, you'll see different changes. Now if you see in this photo, for example, the rocks look quite brownish. Right? And this is an example of what's called diatom algae. Now diatom algae grows onto the rocks, and it looks crap for about 2 months while it goes through this whole process of biological change. And different species will come dominant and succeed to the next one, to the next one. And eventually you end up with a kind of biologically balanced system. I mean, we can't approach nature, you know, it's too complex, but we'll get there. So this is how the tank started out. So almost a year ago now, a little bit more actually. And you can see just how bare it is, okay? I mean, there's nothing. Now this is you're going to see why this is important when we go to the next bit. So here's a few steps, adding the seahorses back in. Now you see these small pieces of algae. These are tiny little pieces we started with. So you know, it was really about encouraging the right life to grow the whole way along. So here we are now, 2 years later. And you can see all these seaweeds have grown. There's coral. The seahorses love it. You know, like this is that little piece you saw in another photo. This red one actually has grown out of the rock on its own. I never introduced this species. Just started growing out of spores that were already on the rock. This is a nice gorgonian. It's related to sea fans and such. toadstool coral, and Nemo and friends. Gotta have Nemo these days, He's a common cucula clown, if anybody wants to know the real name, And there's many, these are, it's called amphias, so very peaceful species that really aren't going to compete with the seahorses, see. This is a beautiful fish called Papa Ben butterfly. He's also there for pest control, actually. I'll talk a bit more about pest control later on. Of course, there's a nice seahorse. This is a male, actually. You can see the pouch here. He's not pregnant, of course, but anyway. And coral banded shrimp. Just a few examples. And you also notice the rock is very, very purple now. Right? And this is not something we've done on purpose. We've encouraged life in the right way, but it's nothing we've introduced. This is what's called coralline algae. And if you've ever been out to the seaside and you see the rock pools and they're lovely and pink, that's coralline algae. Right? It's a live plant, and this actually lays down a calcium onto the rock. So you end up with these beautiful purple rocks in the end, but it's really just life we're encouraging, So I'm going to go through a few more photos of this tank now. The right way. Here's a few more shots. These are fairly interesting. A little bit hard to see in the photo. That's because they're very skinny. They're called the shrimp fish. It's a cousin of the seahorse. They live in sea urchins in nature. You sometimes see photos and thousands of them in a sea urchin. So they're very interesting. They don't compete as well, which is good, because they're all very, very close to seahorses. These, I'm not going to try and pronounce it. The family name of seahorses is complex. But you see anyway. And you see also the Nemo, the clownfish here have adopted the toadstool coral as their new surrogate and enemy, This is also interesting thing that happens in captivity. Here's a few more. There's something else. There's another shrimp fish here. You see some more of the algae, different types of red algae. So the skunk cleaner shrimp, you see them very classically in the mouths of grouper in classic reef shots, The old seahorse, of course. Here's the Banggai cardinal fish I mentioned earlier. Now these are in the G. Now these are endangered, by the way. These are endangered species. But if you notice this one in particular, you see how he has a swelling in the mouth. This is eggs. They're mouth brooders. So they actually will breed quite happily in a fish tank kept in the right conditions. And what happens is the male takes the babies and the eggs into his mouth for about 45 days. And then he releases anywhere from 5 to 50 little tiny miniatures of the Banggai. So they're very cute because they're the same colors and everything, They have that aspect. Everything's cute when it's baby, But we're going to talk about Banggais in a bit more anyway. Here's another cousin, the banded pipefish. It's a rather interesting fish. Kind of reminds me of Beetlejuice. So here's a few more shots. Here you can see the seahorse is hunting. Actually, this was another aspect of the design that we really wanted to address with the feeding issue with the seahorses, because we feed the tank twice a day, but seahorses basically have no stomach, so they need to pretty much eat constantly. So this is one of the concerns. So part of the reason for motivation for switching to a natural design is it would allow zooplankton to naturally breed in the aquarium, and for the seahorses then to eat from the aquarium naturally. So this is a perfect example. He's there hunting for copepods and other zooplankton he can find, which is great, And there's another example of the Banggais here breeding. This one back here, he's a little bit hiding there. He's another pest control. It's called a bristletail filefish, and he eats a rather annoying enemy called the Acacia. It's considered a pest. Basically, they proliferate in aquariums. They love it, and they sting and kill everything that they touch. So it's definitely something you want to address. This is another beautiful animal, the coral banded shrimp. Now this guy is probably 30 centimeters between all the tentacles and the net antenna and such. So he's quite a big animal. You can also see very clearly the purple here, and even some burgundy. This is all the different types of coralline algae that are growing. Actually, this here in this photo, this is what's called the green star polyps coral, and this started as roughly 3 square centimeter, 4 square centimeter piece, very, very small. The last year is growing to cover well over a square foot. So it just shows. All right, so what's involved with a tank like that? It's a big tank. It's a lot of work, But the trick is weekly, regular. So every Thursday, the service is aquarium, 2 hours, religiously, So it's not really that difficult. It's just a simple process, and if you stick to your regular maintenance schedule that you've identified as correct, it's no problem. So I clean the algae off the glass, standard stuff. Trim the algae. would you believe a tank like this grows almost a kilo of seaweed has to be removed every week, of wet seaweed. So it's quite a lot of seaweed picking I do. It's probably the most work I do actually. Clean the gravel, you know, we have a thing we call it the gravel cleaner, it just sucks up water, pulls the bits out. Now there's a device called protein skimmer, I haven't really talked about that. A protein skimmer is also known as a foam fractioner. I don't know if you guys have ever heard this, so definitely come into it third and fourth year. It's a simple machine really, but it's a complex process. The simple explanation is it uses bubbles to collect proteins and wastes and puts it onto the surface of the bubble. These bubbles eventually rise into a foam at the top of the unit, and then they collect. So it's removing the lipids and the very, you know, liquidic wastes from the system. So I mean, don't think about it too much like that. It's a very, very necessary equipment to have on a marine aquarium. So it's basically we're just using foam. Actually, a better example is, have you ever been to the beach when it's very, very windy and you see that brown foam that builds up on the beach? That's exactly the same kind of foam. What's happened is the waves have whipped up the surface of the ocean, where most of the proteins and lipids would be, into this foam on the beach, which is then skimmed. So protein skimmer does the same thing in captivity. Filter floss, taking out the debris, you know. it's standard. 100 litre water change, that's all we need. So we're changing just under 10% of the water per week. Chemical dosing, so I'm putting back in the calcium, which is it's basically lime. It's very similar to garden lime we're using. Then the magnesium would be Epsom salts, is how everybody knows these things. Magnesium sulfate. It's quite simple in implication. I know it sounds a little complicated, but you're basically just taking these elements, adding them to purified water to make a solution, and then dripping them into the aquarium to replace what's been taken out. So, and then again, the bicarbonate would be the sodium bicarbonate. Refill the mix for my next water change. So I have to get the water ready for the next week because, you know, you have to address these things. So daily, the aquarium gets 8 cubes of frozen zooplankton per day. Quite a lot to feed an aquarium really, so it's a lot of waste to deal with in the end. And then monthly, it's just really mainly down to the equipment maintenance. You know, just dealing with the different aspects, the different life that grows. And that's really the biggest problem is everything in a marine aquarium gets covered in some life form. And whether it be sponges, there's one I really despise because they like to stick you in the hand, is the what's called a worm snail. You know, they grow on rocks and they have this really sharp little shell. It's actually, it's amazing this, because they kind of cement themselves to the rock and grow outward, but it's a snail, you know? So they're sessile. You touch them, they go straight into your skin, because they're very sharp, bane of my life, like, you know? But anyway, so we're just taking sea life off the equipment again. Everything you have will be covered in some kind of creature. It's amazing, like, I mean, you start to look really closely and you're seeing some other shrimp or some other sponge or some other worm you've never seen before. And it never stops. I mean, the whole time, you know, if you have an aquarium for 10 years, I guarantee every week you'll find something else you haven't seen before. And this is what's really amazing about these reef aquariums, because it gives you a chance to take the ocean in a small box, really find out what's in there, like, you know. So, common myths about aquariums. Anybody want to throw a few out there? Get some, what have you guys heard? Give me some myths, other myths on that. It's going to be brave enough. Alden, come on, you can do it.
Well, goldfish being kept in small bowls shouldn't be kept in them.
Yeah, okay, well that falls into the first one. Fish grow the size of the aquarium. Unfortunately, this is just not true. This will happen to any creature that's forced to live with its own waste. It just stunts the growth because they're in such unhealthy conditions. So it really breaks my heart to see large species of fish kept in small containers, because you know they're living in there with their own waste. And I mean, some of the hardier fish, you'll see them get to very bad condition before they can actually die, to the point where, you know, the gills are being burnt and this type of thing. So really, it's very important to know the fish, how big the adult size would be, so you can, you know, situate it in the right size aquarium. There's no point in getting something, for example, a large South American catfish that's going to grow 3 meters if you have a 2-foot tank. You know, I mean, what are you going to do with it, like, you know? So this is something that you really have to address. I mean, it's all to do with biomass and hormones. Biomass is simply what produces the waste. Hormones are to do with, I haven't mentioned this actually. Basically, when fish grow, they produce hormones. And because, you know, water is a fluid medium that surrounds them, the hormones are kept in the water with the fish. So the less dilute the water, the more concentrated the hormones. And as these hormones concentrate, they'll actually cause the fish to slow down the growth. Now, this is really important for aquaculture. Because if you're taking and you're trying to grow 20 tons of salmon out of, you know, a 30,000 liter raceway, for example, you got to figure out how to dilute the hormones. You need to address that. You need to know they're there. Implementation of doing it is actually quite easy. So it's just things to be aware of. So the common one: fish have a 3-second memory span. Just not true. Now we're at the point we really don't have that many ways of measuring fish intelligence. I mean, it's a fish. We don't know their language yet. We don't know the guidelines of fish. So a few studies have been done, and stuff has been pretty interesting. For example, we all know the roach, do we? The small little fish in Ireland. It's one of the coarse species. Well, it's very closely related to goldfish. They're all carps. Now, the interesting thing about roach is they've taken roach that were never exposed to pike, put them in a tank with a pike. They don't know anything. They get eaten straight away. They're not even afraid. They just swim around until they're eaten. Now, if you take roach that have been with pike and know to fear pike as a predator, and then put them with the roach that have never seen the pike, then separate them back again, and put the roach that have never seen the pike with the pike they now know. Somehow these fish have taught each other to beware of pike. We don't know how, but I mean, this is an easy test that's there's something there. So there's a lot more to fish than we think. We just don't know yet. We haven't gotten to the point we can really measure stuff, So another good one: tapping on the glass doesn't hurt the fish. Well, unfortunately, that's another one that's not true, and you see it everywhere. People do it all the time. How many of you guys heard the lateral line system? Yeah. So the lateral line is basically very, very sensitive, much more sensitive than our own hearing. And so when you tap on that glass, the fish is hearing a huge loud banging. I mean, and to what the fish gets stress signals. When it hears this banging, it's thinking a predator is nearby. Something big is coming to eat me. Why else would I hear this loud noise? And this is the aspect that we have to worry about. So, for example, if you're putting an aquarium in a public location, like a school, for example, and you don't address some way to prevent people from tapping on the glass 50 times a day, I guarantee you're going to be losing fish. Because the fish are literally going to have a headache all the time. They're always getting harassed, and they always have that fear, adrenaline up, And this is the other thing: water transmits sound much faster and further than air. So, I mean, sounds that we hear on land we think are quiet, it's 10 times, 20 times louder than water, so it's something to address. The other myth that's very common is small aquariums are easier. They're not, and it's very, very simple. The smaller aquariums are less stable. The smaller your body of water, the less stable it is. So the more water you've got, the longer it'll take to change temperature, the longer it'll take for the ammonia or the pH to change, all these different aspects. So that's another important one to think. If you're going to try and do a small, easy fish tank, like a little fish bowl, for example. A fish bowl is a very small little container, and no filtration. We have no way to deal with waste. It's doomed from day one. So this is just an important point. So, some simple principles how to get it right. The easiest one to remember: keeping fish is keeping water, because you have to keep the water healthy. So if the water is healthy, the fish are healthy. It's that simple. You're always addressing what's happening in the water. So it's just an easy one to remember. If you're having a problem with the fish, you're having a problem with the water. It's almost guaranteed. The only aspect where I wouldn't say that's true is to do with nutrition. So that's a different one. Biomass equals waste equals removal or food source. What that means simply is when you have fish, they produce waste. Now, it could be lobsters, it could be any other creature you want, but it's biomass. You have to remove the waste somehow. So either you're removing it, you're removing it by mechanical, chemical, biological means, or you're turning it into a food source. Now, an example where I can turn waste into a food source is where I'm doing, for example, freshwater aquariums. And what's happening there is you've got all this. Actually, we're going to go into that a bit more in the next couple of pages. But the waste at the end of it is being used by the plants as food, and so the system is being completed. And then it's very simple to remove plants. Plants are non-toxic when they're alive and healthy, and not decomposing the water. So instead of trying to remove waste all the time, I'm removing plant roots. It's that simple. Bacteria is filtration. All filters use some form of bacterial filtration. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a system done that didn't have some form of biological filtration. It's simple. How many of you have seen a filter with little foam inserts? Right? Well, the foam there is really to grow your bacteria. It's that simple. You're giving it a substrate, somewhere to grow. And so a sponge is a good example of this because you're giving, it's got lots of surface area. And there's many, many different ways we can grow bacteria on different types of medium. So, I mean, I won't have time to go through 50 different kinds of medium we have, but that's just filters in the tap. And what's happening is they're killing the bacteria. You're taking chlorine, which is meant to kill bacteria, it's put in there to kill the bacteria, and then putting on your beneficial bacteria that work so hard to grow in your filter. So I mean, I sometimes meet clients that have been 2 or 3 years with a fish tank and they're always having problems, and then I find out, sure enough, they're washing the filter in the tap. So it's a simple thing. If you're washing your filter, do it in your aquarium. Take a little water, put it in a bucket, clean it in the aquarium water, always, always, always. And then you just don't have to worry about that. So another important thing, research all the livestock. If you don't know what you're keeping, how do you know what's feeded? How do you know how big it's going to be? And, well, I mean, there's no other way around it. If you're interested in freshwater aquariums, you got to get some books on freshwater aquariums. If you want to keep marine species, get some books on marine species. Don't buy the impulse fish down the pet shop. And you're going to see more reasons for this in a while. So the other things, really what you're looking for with these different species is adult size. How big is it going to grow? Is it going to be bigger than the tank eventually? The environment. Can I actually keep it? Do I have the means to, provide it with all its needs? If it's a deep sea animal, for example, that requires 4 Celsius temperature, do I have the means to keep my tank at 4 Celsius? Now, obviously, that's not going to pop up so often, but it's just a good example. Feeding. Again, I was talking about this earlier. Can you feed it? Is it possible to keep the animal fed? I'm sorry, this thing likes to do its own thing. Behavior. Is it aggressive? Is it a predator? A herbivore? Am I going to put it in? It's going to eat all the rest of my fish, One of the common ones, people often keep cichlid tanks, right? Well, cichlids, there's thousands and thousands of species from different rivers, different lakes, all over the world. So really you have to know what cichlid you're keeping, for example. Often they'll put a cichlid that uses the rocks to spawn year-round, and another cichlid that only wants those rocks when he's actually spawning at that hour. So then these fish end up problems. You might have them together for 2 years and they're fine, and then all of a sudden they're killing each other because they simply don't have the territory to be happy. And again, that falls into compatibility again. You have to just make sure the fish can be happy together. Now, the biologically beneficial organisms. This is an important one. If you can get an animal to do the work for you, it's a lot easier. If I can get a snail that's going to eat the algae off the glass, why am I going to avoid that? It's going to do the work for me for free. It gets more detailed. For example, I was talking about the Artesia pest and enemy. This is the main predator of pests and enemies, called a Berghesia. Now, it's really only about 2 centimeters long, so it's not easy to keep in all types of systems. But this is an important animal for eating pests in our systems. Another pest that commonly pops up in the coral system is predator starfish. Well, you see this animal right here. This is actually a shrimp called the Hartwillen shrimp. Or they're also known as clown shrimp, I don't know, I think, but you see the blue leg, it's on, oh, sorry. This thing doesn't like to cooperate. There we go. Okay, you see the blue leg here? This is what's called a blue Leucaena starfish. And that's what these actually eat. They only eat starfish. So example, it's a very beautiful species. I mean, a lot of people love to keep them. They're not so large, you have them in a small tank. But if you can't solve the problem of feeding a starfish every week, it's not going to survive. So this is a classic animal. Now, we often use them in the larger tanks where we have pet starfish because they're ideal for that. They eat all the starfish and you're not going to have too many to worry about then. Because, to manually remove them is almost impossible. Trying to think about every cranny and nook in the rocks, it's just, you can't be done, So, see this big fish here. Would you believe I've seen this fish for sale in Galway, in pet shops? It's a tiny little 4-inch fish. When it was a baby, it was called a blue dolphin shark. This is the largest freshwater fish ever caught, ever. That's an adult. So, there isn't any aquariums in the whole of Ireland or the UK that can keep this animal alive. Look at the size of this thing. So why would you want to buy something like this for your fish tank? It's a simple thing to research. Just look it up. If I hadn't gone home and looked it up, I would have bought the cute little shark and thought, oh, that's lovely in my tank. Obviously it grows a little big, So I'm kind of going over things again. Feeding is everything. You got to be able to feed the animal. You got to provide it with the correct conditions, the appropriate territories, the appropriate tank mates, so they're not going to fight and kill each other. Predator and pest-free environment. Nothing's going to eat it. It's not going to try to eat anything else. And longevity. It's nice to be able to keep your fish their whole lifespan. It's good feeling when you've had a fish 10 years in your aquarium at home. Also, it's very important if you're doing aquaculture and you're maintaining brood stock. If you're not able to maintain the brood stock very well, you know, you're in real trouble, because then you don't have no larvae to rear, you know, half the build your larvae. I say no company, so we're going to talk a little about, this is the least fun bit of this, okay? So we're going to get a little more technical on all this stuff. The nitrogen cycle. I'm going to drink water before we start this. Okay. This is the number one thing in all aquatic systems to worry about. Fish, shrimps, any kind of biomass. Now we're not talking plants because they're absorbing, but they're going to produce waste. You know, right here. So excess food that decomposes is going to produce waste. So we end up with this, ammonia. Right? Ammonia is highly, highly toxic. You cannot have ammonia in your system. Very, very small amounts will kill your fish. They'll stress them out. You know, you have to deal with ammonia. So then, back to the beneficial bacteria. Bacteria convert the ammonia into the next phase, nitrite. Now, nitrite is slightly less toxic, but still severely toxic. But luckily, we have bacteria. So again, the bacteria will change that. So then we're into nitrate. Now, nitrate is much, much less toxic. For example, if you're doing a salmon farm, the level you're allowed to have your nitrate at is 50 ppm and lower. If you go above 50 ppm, it's considered harmful. And it's the food standards type thing. So nitrate is an important one. Now, most people's fish tanks, you think of your classic shipwreck, you've got the bubbling clam, plastic plants, this kind of thing. There's no way to finish the cycle. You're now stuck here. You're left with nitrate. The only way you're going to get that nitrate out is either add some kind of chemical, use some kind of chemical absorber, or do a water change. So, again, when I was saying dilution is the solution to pollution, it's not mine, that's Anthony Calfo, by the way, he's a very good author and quote. But it's true, if you have a waste, you can, if you take 50% of the water out and replace it with clean water, you've now reduced 50% of the waste. So this is an important thing to remember. Now, in the likes of the coral aquarium and the planted aquarium, basically these natural type systems, we were able to close the cycle. And this is what's very exciting, because you're getting to less and less work, less maintenance, more replicating nature. You see here, nitrate is a food source for plants, for seaweeds, for planktons, phytoplanktons, certain types of bacteria, like the cyanobacteria. I won't get into explaining those. And it can also be turned into nitrogen gas using anaerobic bacteria. Anaerobic bacteria are basically bacteria that grow in the presence of no oxygen. So, stop the pizza? Yeah, definitely. Okay, so anyway, we'll take a little break and eat some pizza.
Guys, there's